Good morning. My name is Jacek Batóg. I work at the University of Szczecin in Poland, and I will present together with my co-author Barbara Batóg our current study on determinants and differences of economic growth within the European Union. To achieve this goal, we will use our own modification of one well-known multidimensional analysis called linear discriminant function. There is no any single solution for sustainable growth and development for every country because of many differences of economic and social nature. For instance, according to neoclassical growth models like Solow-Swan model, the economic growth and development is explained using population growth and technological progress, while new endogenous theories of economic growth indicate other factors like quality and supply of human capital, the level of social capital, technology diffusion, learning and dissemination of knowledge, and many choices that can be made by households. In their study, Bosworth and Collins in 2003 found that the very part of this variation, heterogeneity of between countries in economic growth, is related to differences in some initial conditions like income level, life expectancy, population growth, some also institutional factors like, for instance, the corruption level, and also very important factor like geographical location. Identification of economic growth determinants is not easy because of the complexity of the problem and non-stability of these factors because they change in time. Of course, also we can consider different periods, different data, and different methods. Then we will receive different results in many cases. Why is this determination of economic engines factors is very important? Because without this identification, we cannot construct an effective economic policy. Many previous studies were focused on some individual country or a group of countries, for instance, the new member of European Union or the old ones. They were focused also on determinants of economic growth in a more general approach, like accession to the European Union, on introduction of common currency, and they were most related to the long-term analysis. Then our analysis is made for every single year for almost 2 decades, and we can found some stability or non-stability of these factors. We'll try to apply linear discriminant analysis. It's quite well-known multidimensional analysis, but up to now it was mostly applied at the microeconomic level and mostly to predict bankruptcy. Here you can find some examples of macroeconomic studies where authors applied LDA. For instance, in the first study, there was a try to assess of possibility of Turkey's accession to the European Union. For instance, the last one, the authors tried to evidence if there is any impact of ICT sector implementation on economic growth. We have several goals, but two main objectives of our research are the following. We try to identify the most important factors of economic growth for European Union members in almost 2 decades, from 2002 until 2019. And the second, a little more methodological goal, we try to find if the modification that we propose, the spatial modification of classical linear discriminant analysis, is useful in detection of individual growth paths in genes of the EU members. Of course, we can find many other methods that can be used to achieve our goals, like fixed effects regression methods, for instance, variety of gravity models, but many authors just point out that they have some weaknesses. So in our case, we will apply classical and spatial linear discriminant analysis. The main tool of LDA method is discriminant function that you can see in the first equation. On the left side, there is a grouping variable, and on the right side there are parameters, betas, and predictors, some variables, economic, social, and some others. To find these parameters that enable us to classify objects and to draw some conclusions, you have to fulfill some statistical conditions. And in comparison to this classical case, we will also apply this spatial, I have mentioned already, modification of LDA. When we, apart from original variables x, we use also their modifications using this spatial weights matrix W. After extensive literature study, you can see here several examples of such positions. We have constructed a list of potential factors that influence of economic growth within the European Union. We are not able to use a lot of different variables because of some limitation of databases. For instance, there is no any information about public debt and public expenditures for United Kingdom for the last years. We have used two data sources, Eurostat and the Conference Board Total Economy Database. We studied all members of the European Union within this period, from 2002 until 2019. On this slide, you can see all variables that we use. The first one, YI, is GDP growth rate. This is the grouping variable that allows us to divide, to classify all countries into four groups according to the economic growth rate. And then we consider 9 predictors, exogenous variables: employment rate, export, gross capital formation, we call it investment, some meaning of ICT sector in the economy, labor quality, consumption expenditure, migration processes, total factor productivity, as well as labor productivity. Now I will present some chosen results. In the first table you can see classification of all objects, all 28 countries, according to the dynamics of economic growth into 4 groups. The fourth one means that the highest level of economic development, I mean exactly the speed of economic development. Also we can see that the new member states like Estonia, Poland, Latvia, Malta, they are characterized by the quicker economic growth than the old EU members. When we look at the second table, we can assess the quality of our tool, discriminant functions that we use, and we apply one common measure of statistical quality of such functions. It's called Wilks lambda, and you can see in the second column the value of this measure for classical version of LDA method, and in the last column for spatial variant. And this measure lies in the range between 0 and 1. Closer to 0 means that the better quality of the function of the tool we use. So we can see that all these functions for every year are really a good quality. Based off this discriminant functions, we can classify all countries into 4 groups. We can check if their predictors, variables, are respective for the proper ones for this level of speed of economic development, and you can see that in the classical variant the accuracy of this classification is quite good. It's in most cases higher than 80%. When we apply this spatial modification, when we introduce this spatial weights matrix W into our method in a direct way, so it means that we consider the flows, interactions between all objects, in that case the countries of the European Union, the classification accuracy, the quality of the classification is much higher. In many cases it's equal to 100%. Next two slices show the location of all countries of analyzed objects into the discrimination space. In 2018, when you look at the first figure, we can see that these points that represent 4 different groups, they're located in different places. So it means that there is no high level of discrimination of these objects. So we cannot classify them in an easy way to the specific group. When we look at the second figure, you can see that if we apply this spatial modification, this matrix W, that we can see that, for instance, these red points representing group 1 with the lowest economic growth countries, they are quite heterogeneous, and as well as group 4, 3 and 2. When we already have the good quality tool to classify countries, now we can identify these key factors of economic growth. When you look at the classical case of our method, we can see that the most influential economic growth determinant was consumption expenditure. Next one was total factor productivity and in capital formation. It means investment. And next you can see export influence as well migration processes. When we look at the spatial variant of linear discriminant analysis, we can see that if we consider these flows between countries in the European Union, and we know already that the labor and capital can flow from one country to another one in quite easy way. So in that case, if we consider these relationships, and we can see that all factors are meaningful when we look at the economic growth of the European Union. So we can conclude that this proposed modification of discriminant analysis, especially the spatial modification, is a very effective tool of classification of objects, and in that case of objects according to their level of economic growth. We also found evidence that the new member states were growing more rapidly than the old members of the European Union, and we also could see that the key drivers of economic growth in the last almost 2 decades were consumption expenditure, total factor productivity, it means the productivity of capital also, investment in fixed assets mostly, export dynamics and migration processes. Some other macroeconomic factors that you could see, the other variables, are also important, but we can see their influence only in that case that we incorporate these international interactions between countries. What can we do more? we can try to assess this main key growth factors using different methods. We can compare the results that we will receive when we will use different methods, and we can also consider to provide a separate analysis for a different group of countries, because these countries, even within the European Union, quite homogeneous construction, they are different according to the level of development. Thank you very much for your attention.